And my mom, she loves to say that she doesn't even have a dime. And we joke in our family that we find dimes everywhere because truly the world is abundant. Saying yes to opportunities, whatever those might be, is really important. So like Bill asked, okay, am I CoastFi because of this? Well, I guess the answer is yes. I am totally 100% CoastFi because of my real estate. It's done incredible things for me. So real estate is a way to get that cash flow every single month that doesn't require that time value of money.
Hi, and welcome to Catching Up to FI, a podcast on mindset, money, life on the journey to financial independence. I'm Bill, and I'm a late starter.
I'm Becky, and I'm also a late starter, and we're your hosts. We're here to help you with your journey to financial independence, no matter where you're starting from.
We're going to talk to other late starters, experts, and we'll explore topics related to our mission.
Join us as we catch up to FI together.
Hello, and welcome to Catching Up to FI. This is Bill Youns. I'm here with Becky Heptig and our fabulous guest this week, Amberly Grant. She is a community leader, financial educator, real estate investor, and was recently featured on CNBC's Make It series. She currently owns 7 doors between Canada and the U.S., comprised of both short-term and long-term rentals. Her portfolio consists of 2 duplexes, 2 single-family homes, and a condo. She creates financial educational content on Instagram, hosts a Tuesday FinTalks, where 30 to 50 people of all walks of life talk weekly about different financial topics. She runs a mentorship program and a mastermind, all while holding down a W-2 job and breastfeeding her first child. Amberly is bubbly, energetic, quirky, and determined to bring others along with her on the path to financial independence. Amberly Grant, my friend, welcome to Catching Up to FI.
Happy to be here with you both.
All right, Becky, let's get started.
All right, here we go. Amberly, we want to give our audience just a little taste of who you are, where you've come from, kind of your early money story. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that, and then we're going to jump into real estate. So take us on a journey of where you've come from.
Okay, little Amberly, where was she at? I grew up in Ottawa, Canada, though I was born in Los Angeles, California. So from an early age, I always felt like, oh, I didn't belong because I was an American living in Canada, but I was also Canadian. And it was just a kind of a weird thing being young. And I think that and I spent my first year of school in a wheelchair because my feet had surgery. And I have recently realized that I think those 2 things have made me more who I am than I've ever given them credit for, because I've always been a bit different and thought of things differently. Hence why I'm on a path to FI and found this kind of weird, quirky group. My background, so I grew up in Ottawa. My dad is an artist. He teaches people how to paint and draw. My mother is a caregiver. So we spent my childhood with a bunch of other kids in the house. And my mom also worked in jails where she taught kids, so young adults who are in jail, how to read. And that's kind of, odd jobs for a place like Ottawa, Canada, which is a very conservative government town. My parents got divorced when I was really young, separated, never fully divorced. And their money scripts were something that I watched all the time and wasn't sure exactly what I wanted to mimic. My parents, they actually separated when I was 7 years old, and both of them had really interesting money scripts that I think about today, and I really wanted to do the opposite on. So my father, he always says that he will work till the day he dies. But the cool thing about that is my dad's an artist, and he absolutely loves what he does. So it's kind of like an interesting dichotomy of needing to work for the rest of your life. And he truly has set himself up that way. So at 35 years old, he still needs to work the day he dies. He never kind of, had that aha moment to change something. And my mom, she loves to say that she doesn't even have a dime. And we joke in our family that we find dimes everywhere because truly the world is abundant. You just have to kind of think of it that way. And so I'd watched them. And I just didn't want to have that path. I didn't want to be 65 years old relying on my kids to pay for, utilities or whatever it might be. And I could see that at a young age that that's where they're going. And I could easily follow that route if I didn't make a different choice. So when I was really young, I've always had jobs. I worked, reffing soccer at like 15, no, not even like 10 years old. I started babysitting others' kids at like 10, and I've always been a saver. So from all those small jobs at 15, I got 2 jobs while I was in high school. I worked as a host at a restaurant and then a server. And then I also worked at the bakery. So I'd wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning as a teenager, walk to a bakery that was 45 minutes away, work for 8 hours, go home, change, and then go to the restaurant at night. And this is what I did for the last 2 years of high school. So I've always been a very hard worker, as well as, a big saver. So after that, after I graduated high school, I decided I wasn't going to go to university. I didn't really think that life was for me. And I didn't think I was smart enough back then. Turns out I was probably wrong, but I needed to get out of Ottawa. So I actually took this little car that my dad's friend gave me, fixed it up, and drove it to Los Angeles to get out of Ottawa and no longer be there.
That sounds like quite a journey and difficult. You spent your 20s, however, not so much necessarily as a saver. There's an interesting journey there, and I'd like to hear a little bit more about that, what led to your transition to a super saver.
Yeah. Well, Bill, I was listening to your intro. So what your podcast number 1, right? And one of the things that you had mentioned that really resonated with me was that thing that we didn't really feel like you got to have a childhood. And that's how I felt, where I was always thrust into responsibility at a very young age, and that things were dependent on me. Whether I really should have taken those on as an adult, I realized maybe that wasn't my responsibility. And I still to this day take on things I probably shouldn't for others. But I never really felt that I got that sense of, just whimsicalness that some people have in their childhood. And when I moved to Los Angeles, when I was 20 years old, I decided that is when I was going to have it. I no longer had the responsibility. I was only responsible for myself, not my dad, not my sister, not my mom and her stupid relationship, none of that stuff. It was just me at that point. And I didn't make a lot of money. For the next 10 years of my life, I made about an average of $15,000. And so although I didn't make a lot, I didn't spend a lot either. And I was able to take all that money and I just basically traveled the world doing odd jobs and taking on 3 jobs at a time. And then I would quit and then I'd spend all that money living in New York City or in Australia or in Germany or wherever it might be. And that was perfect for my 20s. It was great to explore, test the waters, find out how resilient I was, learn about myself, get the confidence I needed to move into my late 20s and 30s, where I knew I had to not live like that anymore. So that aha moment, I've always been a saver and frugal person, but I never had enough money. That aha moment of what am I going to do with all this money really came at the ending of school, where I had to get a real job, quote unquote, that actually made more than $15,000 a year. And I had to decide in that moment, do I continue free-spirited in a certain way? Or do I now kind of buckle down and use all the financial concepts I've been learning since I was 15 years old and apply them hardcore so I can get ahead?
So you spent your 20s living life. Do you have any regrets?
Oh, heck no. Oh, man, I think all of my generation's regret was, 2008 crash. I should have just been, a full-fledged adult with a bunch of money in the bank and buying houses. JK, I just graduated high school a year before that. So no actual regrets. My motto in my 20s and currently is that I want to look back on my life. And if I were to pass away at any point, I want to have known that there was nothing that I left unsaid, that there is I didn't try hard enough at something, that I didn't say yes or go for it. And so that's kind of been my motto throughout my life. And I don't think there's one situation I look back and say, I really should have done that differently, because I am where I am today because of all that.
So you have no financial regrets, because we hear all the time about saving early to change your life later. Doesn't sound like you did that.
That is a harder one, because when I was earlier on my journey to FI and starting it, for me, I felt like I started way behind. 29, I got my first real job, finally had some money in a savings account that was more than, maybe $2,000. And I felt like such a failure because I didn't do the thing that everyone did. Go to university until 22 years old, get your first job and save money, or some people don't save, as we already know, hence why this podcast exists. Get married, buy your first house, upgrade it to your second house. And by 29, I felt like I was very, very, very behind. I look back now and know that I have never done things the way that others have. And so if I were to really regret something, it's because I'm comparing myself to someone else. And I have had my own journey. And today, when I look at myself at Amberly at 35, I have zero financial regrets because, yep, I could be richer. I could have put more money aside or not done a trip, but it doesn't affect where I am today. And I'm very proud of where I've gotten to. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does, because this is the exact story of late starters.
Yeah. Yep.
And it's not always about the money. I mean, there are other things in life besides just the money. The money's important, but it's not all about that. So Amberly, the Amberly you're describing to us now, up to about 30, and the Amberly I know today is quite different in your job, your life, just everything about that, your family. So give us the transition between the free-spirited Amberly that travels the world to where you are now.
There's always been the A-type personality that's always tucked in behind all the decisions I've always made, right? So I've never just done something willy-nilly without some sort of backup plan or enough money in the bank to get me home. I've never been reckless, right? I've always been calculated, but on a different path. And so with the travel, one of the things I realized, and it's people who are actually like, there's a lot of younger and older people who like want to be a nomad or like geo arbitrage or things like that. And the thing I learned in my 20s from living all over the world is that having a home base is really important. And being in a culture that you understand and feel comfortable in is really important. Having a local gym so you stay healthy, eating food that you can cook at home is really important. And I learned that and making friends. In my late 20s, what I realized is that I had transient friends everywhere around the world, which was incredible because I could travel for really cheap. And those friends I made really deep connections with, but I'm not in with them day to day. So I go to Germany, I hang out with a friend, we have a really great time for 2 weeks, and then I leave, right? But when I come home to Denver, I didn't really have much here built up. And so what I realized in my 20s was that I needed to start getting myself grounded. And that grounding actually came in a partner. So I joked that I'm like a little balloon and my partner was like a rock. So he kind of kept me grounded to Denver. And that was a really important transition, going from flittering around the world to signing up for school, going to classes every day, taking the summers to go do a bit of fun things, but building those relationships, going to the gym, staying healthy. All that stuff started happening in my late 20s. And then I graduated from university, and those kind of like being disciplined that way really helped me when I started getting a job with a lot of money and then being able to move forward. So to answer your question really like in a short way, that transition is something that I kind of had an aha moment that I wanted more out of life. And to do that, you need to have some sort of grounding or building a base. And I didn't have that.
It seems like in a lot of our financial lives, we end up having trauma.
Mm-hmm.
Mental health is also a huge part of FI for me. It helps me deal with burnout. Did you run into any traumas along the way? It sounds all, rainbows and unicorns so far, but was that really the case?
No, I'm really good at sugarcoating things. It's one of like my strongest, I guess, personality traits is like, I can make any situation good and I can look back and think anything's great, but there's tons of things that have happened to me throughout my lifetime that have been pretty traumatic and or difficult. So like my home life there's a reason I left Ottawa. 19 years old, got in a car and drove across to an entirely different country because my home life was really, really bad. And on both sides of my home life, but between my dad's and my mom's house, it was not a good place for me to be. And that was like, I had to escape. And that's a really difficult thing to come to terms with. And that was my entire 20s was coming to terms with my parents and who they were as people, who I was, because I am my parents. And if you ignore that, then you become them. And so how can I take the lessons that I learned from them? But I mentioned that I had a partner that grounded me. And the really great thing, it was a 6.5-year relationship. We got engaged. We bought a house together. My first house I ever bought was with him, with his mom contributing. And then 6 months after buying the house and moving in together for the very first time, there were already red flags. He's a great person, absolutely fantastic, wonderful person, not the right person for me in my 30s. And so I ended up leaving him. And leaving a 6.5-year relationship with someone you lived with and a family who lived just, down, in Boulder, just 30 minutes away, that you'd spent 6.5 years with, where they just basically stopped all communication was a really, really difficult time for me. I literally was in a 1-year depression while starting this FinTalks community. We'll talk about that in a second. But I was in this really big depression where I didn't know what I was going to do. I had to buy out a house. So what we decided, but before we bought this house together, because we were unmarried, we decided what would happen in 1 year if we were to break up, 3 years. What happens if someone dies? Who gets equity? What does this look like? And we each put in $25,000 to our house, and his mom put in $50,000. So when we broke up, we had to decide who was keeping the house. And this is right before the pandemic. I decided I wanted the house, and he decided he did not. So now I owed them $80,000 in a down payment in March of 2020 to give back to them. I was running an Airbnb out of my basement that was paying my mortgage. And if everyone knows what happened in March of 2020, the stock market totally tanked right after I wrote them an $80,000 check. The pandemic happened, and all my expenses went to, like, all my income other than my W-2 went to zero. And so not only was I dealing with this really difficult breakup, yes, I broke up with him, but that doesn't mean it's like easy. You have a lot of guilt and sadness when it comes to that, because I still loved him and he just wasn't the right partner for me. And I wasn't the right one for him ultimately, but he didn't see that at first. And I had to pay them $80,000 out of like scrape by to get this money. My Airbnb went to zero, and I was alone in a house with no furniture because he took it all. And what do you do? And that was a really, really dark moment for me.
So real estate became a thing for you.
Mm-hmm.
What was your income at the time that you had this first big job? What did it escalate to? And let's talk a bit about real estate and get to your story about how that's made a huge difference in your life.
Yeah. So I'm really grateful to my ex and his mom for contributing to the very first house we got. I was really under the impression that you had to put 20% down, which is really the gold standard when it comes to real estate for multiple reasons. But when I was applying for the first house, I was the only one applying for the mortgage, because for me, it made the most amount of sense, because I could get first-time home buyers credits based on the income that I had, which was $52,000 at that time. We bought a $500,000 house in Denver, which is pretty insane that they gave me a loan at a $50,000 a year job for a house that was $500,000. Good job, bank. Either way, I took it.
That's just blows my mind. What year was that?
Oh, this was 2019. So the cool thing was the first time home buyers program that I was a part of also was subsidizing any PMI if I had put down less than 20%. And the whole thing was to get new first time home buyers into neighborhoods that they might not be able to afford and, help them out and stuff. So great. Good job. I won't name the bank. Either way, I loved it. I got a bunch of money down, and that was great. So I think I ended up getting like $8,000, and I could actually use that towards my down payment because of this program that I was using. So anyways, that was my first house, $511,000. I think it was. We put 20% down. I had to end up buying that out again 1 year later at $80,000. I had changed jobs from the time. So I got one raise. I went from 52,000 to like 60,000. It was a scheduled raise that I was getting. And then from 60, I was asking for more because I had been taking on projects and things that were quite much more, but like I was taking on projects from PMs who were screwing them up, and they were making double what I was making plus bonuses. And so I was like, hey guys, I need to get closer to them for being to be like, this is really worth it, not leave this company. They didn't listen to me and take me seriously. So I ended up jumping ship to another company. I ended up doubling my income. So I went from like 67 to $115,000. And that's when I was really able to pay them back, right? Because I had a much better income with barely any expenses at that point. And that was my first property. So I paid them back. And then I bought my second property.
Wow. On an income of $115,000, you're now an owner of 2 properties.
Mm-hmm.
This escalated to 7 properties over a period of, it sounds like, 3 to 4 years. How the heck did you do that?
Yeah. So I want to clarify, it's doors versus property. So I actually own 1, 2, 3, 4 properties. One's my partner, and I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 6 doors that are all my own. So how that worked is both of them were duplexes in Denver. So I would run the upstairs as a long-term rental or live there as my primary residence. And then the downstairs is a short-term or mid-term rental, depending on the economy. So it's either an Airbnb or a nurse rental. My other property was the same way. So it's an up-down duplex with the same address. So on top, it's a long-term rental or my primary residence whenever, depending on, when I was living there. And then the downstairs is a short-term rental or mid-term rental, again, depending on what I was doing. And then, so I was able to take equity out of my first house to help with this down payment on my second house, because I had to put 15% down because it was zoned as a multifamily. So it could have up to 3 units. It currently had 2 units, so I can still build a third unit. But the zoning's really messy on how I'd have to do that. And that property I was able to buy, and that property was $710,000. That one was a really expensive property as well. So I put another $100,000 down on that one and then acquired that property. Fixed it up, got renters. I have an incredible renter who has gone from the basement to the upstairs and followed me. He comes to FinTalks weekends. He's absolutely fantastic. So he really helps to manage that house in regards to the basement rental, and I pay him for it. Then from there, I did get together with my partner. And so he has a condo in Vancouver. So I helped manage that condo. So he brought that into the relationship. That was not mine. We actually just bought a house here in Longmont. That's our single family residence. And I know we'll talk more about that in a bit, but I was the one who came up with the cash for that one because my partner can't work because of visa reasons. And so I'm the primary breadwinner and person in our relationship. And then recently I acquired a new property in Ottawa, Canada. So my father is aging. I'm an artist, doesn't have a lot of money, and can no longer afford his home. So my sister and I have bought him out of his house and are now responsible for all the bills until he passes on that house. So that's my newest acquisition. I just got a month and a half ago.
That's incredible. Absolutely incredible. And it happens so quickly.
Yeah.
There's lots of ways to make money in real estate, and there's 4 primary ways of making money. Can you take us through these advantages? Because it's not just passive income. There's more to it.
Yeah. So when people talk about passive income, I just want to clarify this. A lot of people on TikTok and Instagram will be like, oh, make passive income, go into real estate. Real estate is not passive. There's points in real estate that can be more passive than others, especially if you have property management, right? That comes along with a property. But the truth is real estate is only considered passive income because the IRS considers it passive income, right? So it's not actually in your own life. There's always an activity to do. So if you want to go through the different 4 ways of doing it, really, essentially you can buy a house that needs something to be fixed up in it. So you're basically putting in sweat equity or some sort of appreciation in the property. So you buy it, you update it, and then either you sell it or rent it out and keep it, right? And there's a bunch of ways to do that and different ways to make money doing that. You can do what I do, which is, a combination of short-term rentals, mid-term rentals, or long-term rentals. And you can do that based on the city's requirements, right? So each city is going to have a very specific requirement with what type of rental you can do. And it's really important to look that up before ever buying a property. You can do house hacking. So that's kind of what I started with, which was essentially I lived on top, I short-term rented the bottom, and I shared my space with others, except for, thankfully, I looked for a spot that was completely separate, so they could always be separate. But technically, I was house hacking, right? I had someone in my space who was living there who was helping me to pay the mortgage, or for me, really pay the mortgage, which is that short-term rental, which I, cleaned and did all the stuff for that. And then you have other ways of doing that I'm not as familiar with in regards to real estate syndications and REITs, but those are you are not hands-on for those. Those are probably the most passive way of doing it, other than the research and knowledge you have to do up front.
So there's a whole spectrum of real estate from highly active to predominantly passive.
Yeah.
I think it starts with flipping homes on the active side or wholesaling, and then it ends up being REITs or syndications. I happen to be involved in syndications. We'll probably talk about that on another episode. I'm also involved in REITs, which is basically like a stock index fund, essentially very similar. You've been in the active side of real estate. My understanding in real estate is there's 4 ways that really increase your net worth. One of them is appreciation of the real estate. Another one is the cash flow from the real estate, the active income. Another one is actually the depreciation augments your capital. And then there's principal pay down, that your tenant pays the mortgage, so your equity increases in that property. There's so many things that go on in real estate that make a difference, other than just buying passive index funds with dividends and capital appreciation. How has that made a difference in your real estate? How much leverage are you involved in? What leverage do you recommend, especially given today's market with high interest rates?
Yeah, high interest rates have changed the game. I mean, completely. So let's go first into your kind of original question, which is, what does it look like for me? I have been so fortunate having these short-term rentals and long-term rentals, and specifically the 2 first properties I bought. A lot of people, and this is to your late starter crowd, they bought a single family home that was their home. Then they wanted to renovate it because they want a nicer kitchen and a bathroom. And truthfully, in my mind, that is the literal opposite way you should be doing real estate. Your first real estate purchase should be difficult, meaning you're either flipping them, so you're going in and putting equity into them, only doing that if you know what you're doing and knowing the right contractors, because that can become extremely difficult and pricey, or house hacking, living with other people. So if you're young, there is no reason why you shouldn't get a house. If you can afford a house, right? Get a house and have roommates living in it. So for me, I've been really fortunate that I made 2 purchases that were, I don't even want to say lucky. I was very specific with the types of housing I wanted. I wanted housing with natural light so that anyone who was living there in the both top and bottom could have like a really nice place to stay, which also meant that I could put more, I could raise my rents or have my rents higher than maybe some other places in the neighborhood. I also looked at places that were kind of up and coming-ish. So there were maybe the lesser, nicer neighborhoods in Denver. Denver's a really nice place to live, so there's not too much there. And also one address, because one address allows me to do a lot with a property without having it a proper duplex, to ensure that I'm staying within city rules. My long-term rentals pay for my mortgages. So the long-term rentals, so the top upstairs of all my properties, pay for the mortgage, taxes, and insurance, sometimes a little bit more. Therefore, the bottom is essentially covering any capital expenditures, so like a new roof or water heater, repairs, so a dishwasher goes out, and profit. So essentially, as long as one of those 2 pieces is always full, my mortgage and everything is taken care of, which means I'm getting equity in the property without paying it myself. So for my first property, it appreciated in value. I was able to take money out of that to pay for my second property. And then my second property is appreciated in value, is now worth 33% more than I put into it. I only put 15% down into it. And so I could take money technically out of that if I ever needed to do something else in the future. So for me, having a short-term rental and a long-term rental on top has been incredible for my cash flow, which is what I was going for. Some people go for appreciation. In the Vancouver market where we have our condo, it's appreciation. Like you can barely make the numbers work there. You can't make the numbers work at all. You just like wait for it to go up and up, because that's what Vancouver real estate does most of the time. And for me, it's always cash flow, because I was a late starter. I was someone who I considered at 29 years old, basically starting at zero with a lot of brains and smarts and things. What am I going to do to increase my life to FI? And for me, real estate was something I always wanted to do, because I've always wanted to like run a bed and breakfast. And I've always like been curious about it. That's everything you'll hear is like me being like curious. And I'm like, oh, let's just jump in and see what happens. And that's what I did. And so that has just completely changed the game. My portfolio right now, not including the current acquisition, because that's literally just like a loss for many years, makes me approximately $6,500 a month in net profit. So I can do a lot with that.
Amberly, it sounds like you've got lots of different kinds of real estate in different locations. Mm-hmm. So you've got a smorgasbord of rentals. How do you, and I know nothing about real estate. It's not something I've ever done. How do you go about just evaluating a property? I mean, you can't just go out and say, oh, that house is cute, I think I'll buy it. So how do you run the numbers, and what do you look at to determine if this is going to make you money or not?
Yeah, I have a spreadsheet, as all of us in the FI world do. And that spreadsheet basically tells me everything. So for my second property, I didn't have it for my first. My first property, I was kind of flying blind and was figuring it out as I went. I knew I could maybe do some things and make it work, but I was really using that as a learning opportunity, which that one, if we talk about regrets, yes, there are some, like I could love to go back and do something different there, but I can't change it. And I've made enough money that I'm okay. With my second property, I had a spreadsheet, and that property I called the zombie deal, where it just kept coming back and things changing, and the owner, I worked directly with the seller or the owner. So he kept changing his mind on things that he would promise, and then he'd take back and promise and take back. And so I constantly had to quickly update my spreadsheet, and I text my friends, Zach and Julie. I think Bill, at least Zach, and both of you both know Zach. I would text them and be like, oh my God, he's changed the terms again. I've had to update the spreadsheet. It still works, but I think I'm being crazy now, right? Because it would get like less and less money over time. And so the spreadsheets are really important. There's a couple things you kind of can think about when it comes to real estate is familiarity. Do you know the area? I purchased places that I was familiar with. I live in Denver, Colorado. I knew Denver, Colorado. I knew the market of Denver, Colorado, and how it was growing because I've been experiencing it for the past 10 years at that point. So familiarity, location, right? Is it in town that's growing or dying? And you can really tell that by the number of people moving there. Is there universities? Is there different types of companies in the city? Denver has a ton of different types of company. It's not just oil and gas. It's not just tech. It's not just finance. It's not just restaurant industry, right? It's not travel and tourism. It's a little bit of everything, which means that this place is going to continue to grow and or stay the same over time. And since I'm looking at cash flow, I don't really care about appreciation. That's just something that comes with it. And then you can look at, I'm trying to think of the other two factors that I definitely think about when it comes to this. Obviously, does it cash flow, appreciation? What are you really looking for in the deal? Because that's really important. And then, so for me, Denver is where I invest, or the Colorado market is where I invest because I know it and I'm not comfortable going outside of it, other than we have a condo in Vancouver that came with the relationship. And then I obviously don't have a choice of the dad one.
So there are some rules of thumb that a lot of people use to evaluate the numbers on real estate.
Mm-hmm.
Take us through the back of the napkin approach you have when you're time pressed to put out an offer and grab a deal.
The easiest thing you can do is the 1% rule. And most markets do not satisfy that anymore. So I don't know how relevant that is. But essentially, if I'm buying a $500,000 house, can I rent it for 1% of that? So can I rent it for $5,000? Yeah, $5,000 a month. More than likely, you probably can't, right? Denver, Colorado, in a 2-bedroom, 1-bath place with a 1-bedroom, 1-bath below, I cannot do $5,000 with just a regular one person living in that house. So that's one piece. Some markets do satisfy that. Smaller Midwest markets satisfy it. Kansas, I know Tennessee used to do it. I think it's no longer the case. Everyone's really interested in Ohio, things like that, right? So there's some markets that still satisfy that 1%. So that's a quick, easy way of doing it. For me, the couple things that I check. One, what are rents in the area? So I right away go on Craigslist, Zillow, and find out what are other people renting for a place for a similar property, 2-bedroom, 1-bath. Okay, great. What are my expenses? Something to think about is a lot of people don't realize that if you're buying a property that's been flipped, your current amount of taxes is not going to be the same next year when they reevaluate what those taxes are based on like your upgrades, right? So just some things to keep in mind. So what are the taxes? What are the insurance? What is your mortgage payment? Are you paying PMI or not? And then from there, utilities, if you're doing a short-term rental, you're responsible for those. So what are the average utilities? This new house I bought, I didn't realize the average utilities are $400 in the wintertime and $250 in the summer. That's a huge increase. Is there HOA? So taking all those expenses, what you think those rents are that you just looked up on Zillow, putting those together, do you get a positive number or a negative number? If you get a negative number, then you are not cash flowing. So are you going for appreciation, which is not a guarantee? So you have to think about that. If you get a positive number, how positive? Are you just one dishwasher away from being negative for the entire year? Are you one roof away from being negative for the entire year? That's the types of things you're going to have to quickly think about. And if it satisfies just the positive or negative, then you go more into the deal. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
How do you evaluate repairs? Like, is there a rule of thumb about that? Is it a percentage, or how do you guesstimate how much you might need to set aside? Well, and let me back up. Do you set aside money out of your rents that you could use like a sinking fund for future repairs?
You guys know all about sinking funds. So yes.
You're a listener. You listen to it.
I like to know my audience. So yes, If you don't put money aside for repairs, then you are being absolutely irresponsible with your properties. So for me, when I'm evaluating those numbers, it depends on the property. So there's like a rule of thumb, 1% for capital expenditures per year for the property. If we're thinking about Colorado, if I'm buying a $711,000 house, let's say $700,000 house, I'm going to put $7,000 away every single year to make sure that I can pay for like capital expenditures, meaning large upgrades for the property. But truthfully, that number doesn't quite make sense if you have a brand new build, because you're not going to need a roof for 20 years. And if you put $7,000 aside for 20 years, you're going to have a ridiculous amount of money left that you don't really need, right? Yes, you're going to have to do the water heater, the furnace, and the roof all at the same time, but it's still not going to cost whatever that, $140,000 that you put aside, whatever, right, over that time. So it's being smart, knowing the property. My first property was a flip. So someone else flipped it, meaning it was brand new for a roof, water heater. The furnace was 7 years old. So I know when I'm putting money for that aside, I'm actually going to do less of that 1% because I don't need that money for like 15 years. So instead of say putting the $5,000 for the house per year, I might put like $3,000 per year and let that accumulate for a couple of years. So the answer is it kind of depends. And there are rules of thumb, 1% for capital expenditures, vacancies. You can just look that up on Zillow in the area and see how vacant your property is going to be throughout the year. And there's ways to like mitigate that, right? So it's a subjective game that in the beginning, play by the rules. And then once you start learning those rules, you can kind of get a bit more subjective.
There's also a rule that I'm familiar with that I want you to share with our audience called the 50% rule. Can you go through that?
What is the 50% rule?
I think it summarizes, your expenses for the year, and you have to plan on 50% of expenses over the year. We'll have to look it up and maybe put it in the show notes, but it's a rule that I've heard of that I think guesstimates or roughly estimates some of the line item expenses that you're going through.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I just quickly Googled it while you were saying that because I was curious to see exactly. And it's saying specifically, it's a guideline used by real estate investors, clearly not me, to estimate the profitability of a given rental unit. And essentially, you subtract 50% of the property's monthly rental income when calculating its potential profits. Okay, because I assume that you're thinking those are going to go towards expenses. Yeah, I think all these rules are really important when you're getting started because a lot of new young investors might be swayed by TikTok and Instagram and all those fun things, just saying like, just go do it. But if you don't run the numbers, you're going to get into trouble. And in the beginning, you should stick by the numbers as much as you can. And then as you essentially have like more in your back pocket, not only for money, so you can make mistakes because you have money to recoup those mistakes, you can kind of get a little bit more risky.
Tell us about the impact that short-term rentals have on you versus long-term rentals. How much do you earn from short-term compared to long-term, and what kind of a difference does it make?
Yeah, so short-term rentals are approximately 3 times what you'd make for a long-term rental. So if I were to like rent my property for $2,000, I'll make approximately $6,000 in the Denver market on short-term rentals. The thing with short-term rentals is they're a lot more work. So you can have things that are automated. So you have some automated messages to your people. But if you really want to keep yourself higher up, in your star rating, because everyone rates each other when it comes to short-term rentals, you do have to have, you have to care about your property. So something to think about with the short-term rentals for me is making sure I have a good cleaner and paying them well. Going to the property and doing inspections from time to time to make sure everything looks good, having it stocked with coffee, and you have to also furnish a short-term rental. So you might buy a property, but you have to, you've got $10,000 you're going to have to spend to furnish that property. So that's something just to keep in mind for people. And for me, it's worth it. It's 3 times as much income. Probably half of that goes towards expenses, but so I'm still making like 1.5 of what you'd make for a long-term rental. So though the profits are higher, the net is not as high as people think it is.
Amberly, how important is it to have a team to go along with you, like a real estate agent, a plumber, an HVAC guy, a handyman? I mean, is that something that you build over time? Do you do all that kind of stuff yourself unless you just can't? Or how do you handle that?
So great question. You need a team. And a team is really, really important because, again, for short-term rentals, but even long-term rentals, you need a team. Your team's just different. So short-term rentals, you have a main cleaner, or maybe you have like 2 cleaners, and you always need to have a backup. Because today, a story for you all is I have a cleaner. So my tenants actually clean my Airbnb. So the great thing is they make money living on top of them. They just run down, clean, do the laundry whenever they want to later on. And then it's like all set up for the next person. And they make like, $40 to $45 a cleaning, depending on what they're doing, for like literally like 40 minutes of work. It's fantastic for them. You have to have your main cleaner. Great. My cleaner yesterday told me at 9 p.m., she had a cleaning today, that her friend bought her a plane ticket to Lake Como, Italy for tomorrow, aka today, and she will not be able to clean the unit. So then, of course, I messaged my backup cleaner who said, actually, sorry, I'm too busy tomorrow. I can't do it. So I had to either, I would have to go down and clean because I cannot leave it unclean for the guest, or thankfully I have a partner who can't work. And so he ran down and cleaned it, but I was on baby duty while working my W-2 job and getting prepped for this, right? So things get a bit chaotic. Having a team is really important, especially when it comes to repairs with someone you trust. Truthfully, I just recently found a handyman after 3 years who isn't going to show up, fix something. And I'm putting this in quotations for people who are not visually watching this, if it ever goes to YouTube or something, fix something in quotations, and then charge you $600 and walk away. And then turns out that thing is still broken. So that happens a lot for me, where when I couldn't be home, like I was traveling or something, I'd have to call someone. And honestly, it just never seemed to get fixed. And I've asked so many people for references or resources, and no one has good people. So I find that really difficult. So I've had to essentially decide to do most everything myself. So repairs, lots of YouTube videos. And then I'm really lucky that my partner is handy. And so he has been the primary person to go fix those things, which saves us money. And like, that's how, one of the ways that he contributes to our household.
This sounds like a lot of work.
It's a lot of work.
People worry about the clogged toilet in the middle of the night and they don't get involved in real estate. How do you automate some of these things so that you can have a life? You've got a W-2 job, you've got a young family, you got your own household. I've got a full-time job. I don't know how I would do all this. And how do you get to the point where you can automate it so that it's more passive?
Yeah, I've been called one of the most productive people that people have met because I don't stop. So the answer is there is ways to automate, right? So if I really wanted to, I've done all the numbers to have a property manager. So I could have someone who works for me for my properties, right? So if something goes wrong, they could call them. And this could be for the long term or short term. The problem I have with that is you normally end up managing the property manager. And you're paying them. So I find that can be a lot of back and forth work, and finding a good property manager is just like trying to find a good team for handymen. It can be really difficult, and you go through a lot of them. So to answer your question directly, there are ways to automate it, but it's never going to be completely off your shoulders. So for me, certain messages to Airbnb, like I have a welcome message that goes out to each person before they arrive that I don't have to touch anymore. I used to do it, and it was so ridiculous that I would do that. And then I learned about the automated messaging. Same thing for the checkout message. Hey guys, really appreciate you staying here. Here's just, can you please do your dishes? And then really enjoyed having you, blah, 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 right? That goes out automatically as well. My cleaners all have access to my calendars, and I trust them. And sometimes I freak out because I hope that they've cleaned, but I trust them to do it, and I don't check up on them. I just think, yes, they know their job, they do their job, and they always told me when they can't clean. From time to time, that has bitten me with a specific person who is one of my cleaners. But I now know to always check up with her because she's missed a couple of cleanings a few times. When it comes to the long-term rentals, they kind of take care of themselves. But finding someone new is kind of the most difficult process of that, or if something goes wrong, like a repair. And so for people, if they really wanted to get into this, you just need to add that property management line to that spreadsheet. So 8%. Essentially. So someone else can do all of this, right? Finding someone new, answering any questions, making sure people get their deposit back, etc. I just won't do that because I don't want to pay that person 8%. I'd rather take it and just be, stressed.
So real estate's a big part of your portfolio. Can you give us an idea of the percentages, the breakdown of your asset allocation, and how private real estate, what size of a role does it play? That's question number one. Second question is, have you gotten to the point in 3 or 4 years after this late start of CoastFi with this passive or this actively passive income every month of $6,200?
Yeah. So I have. So to answer your question, your second question first and your first question second. Yes, I am now lucky enough where the income we get from our rentals covers our expenses until we bought this house. So this house is a lot more than I should say, we knew exactly what we were paying for it. We knew exactly what the payments were going to be. I didn't realize in the moment that it kind of made us a bit more house poor. It's still in the 30% of our take home, but that also meant that I had to continue taking home a little bit more. So it mean that my rentals pay for this house and above, but we'd have to really reduce our lifestyle if we wanted to live only off that. So that would be like proper fire, but really just being, I'm a landlord now. I have another job, right? And I could quit my W-2. And so that's just been incredible. And instead, what we've decided is I'm going to continue working. And I didn't have a lot in my brokerage account, so I'll answer that in a second. And so that's been my goal for the past 5 years or 4 years now, besides real estate, is putting as much money towards my retirement accounts and my brokerage accounts as possible so that I can start living off that with the 4% rule in the future, and securing my future that way. Because the way that I think, there's that scarcity mindset that I have, and I am always afraid of when is this all going to end? Even though it hasn't ended yet, but I'm always like, just now, one of my short-term rentals is no longer my primary residence because we bought this house, so that it can no longer be a short-term rental under my name. Meaning that's probably half of that 6,500. So we'll still get a long-term, or I'll do a short-term in a different way because I know how to do that, but not, going against the law in any way. So that's going to take time to roll up. So the money is going to take a while to come back in. So the answer is, I'm just taking all this time right now to fill up my brokerage accounts with this cash and maybe buy some more property in the future. And I'm not ready to step away quite yet because I absolutely love all this stuff. My asset allocation right now, I literally did this like a couple of days ago. I had to do it for the CNBC Make It series back in October of last year, but I just did it recently too. So essentially all of my cash, and that would include just general investments, is about $400,000 now, which I feel so proud of. I cannot believe I've gone from like zero to that in so little amount of time. And the equity in the properties that are just mine, not including my partners, because I try and keep that separate to see like, what did I build versus not? And my equity, not including any equity in the house that I just got right now, is over $700,000. So $750,000, the equity I have in my properties. So like 50%.
Okay. Did you neglect your 401k at job? Did you just not contribute for years in order to do the real estate?
I never had a 401k. So I didn't have one until I got my real job. And even then, I always maxed out my 401k. I have I recently did an Ask Me Anything, and someone asked, should they stop contributing to their 401k to put it into real estate? And the answer in my mind is no. Those buckets can never be filled again once you've walked away from them. So it's always important to fill up your 401k, your IRA, and then you can do whatever was left over with the money afterwards. So take care of your future self and the buckets that you can never get back, and then put anything extra into the next step. And that's what I did.
Amberly, we've got a question specifically for our audience, and that is, do you think that real estate is something that a late starter should consider? Is it something that they can do? Are the risks worth it? Are the risks too high for someone who's starting, in their 40s or 50s?
Yeah, I think the question really is, do you want to be a landlord? That's the number one thing you should ask yourself. Is that something you want to do? And then if the answer is yes, you have two options. You do property management, so you get properties that satisfy with that property management cost, or you do the work yourself. And if you're going to do the work yourself, like, can you do it? Do you have time to do it? And do you want to do it? So that's the first question. Landlord. Yes. Okay, great. It is a fantastic way to build wealth for today. So like Bill asked, okay, am I CoastFi because of this? Well, I guess the answer is yes. I am totally 100% CoastFi because of my real estate. It's done incredible things for me. If I could go back and never do it, I would be so sad because I would not be where I am today because of this real estate and the appreciation and the cash flow I've gotten every single month from it. And so I think it's important to ask yourself that first question. And then it's a lot of work. And are you willing to put in that work for that, like the money that you get right now? And I think the late person can do it. Bill had mentioned something earlier when we were just chatting in the beginning. There's other ways to do it too. If you're a late starter and you need to take care of your own retirement, but you're feeling like you really want to contribute to your kid's life, one of the ways you can do that is helping them with a down payment on their house and kind of satisfying that part of your life, right? The giving to them now, not giving to them when you're gone, and letting them build equity in a place and get roommates. So then they're not responsible for the mortgage. You're not responsible for helping them out anymore. So that's kind of a way that a late starter can also do it, which is giving to someone else so that they're no longer your responsibility in that way. And then again, for a late starter, it really is an incredible wealth builder for today, where if you're going to put a bunch of money away into the stock market, like you guys know, you can't live off it for a long time because you still want a bit of compound interest, or you have to catch up quickly, like Bill had mentioned in one of his episodes, which is, making sure that you're putting a ton of money in those buckets because you no longer have the compounding over time. So real estate is a way to get that cash flow every single month that doesn't require that time value of money.
Is today's market prohibitive to real estate investing for the late starter, i.e. high interest rates and high prices?
Not necessarily. You just have to change your way of looking at it. Maybe you don't invest in this town that you live in because Denver, Colorado, everything's $1 million, right? So maybe you go into a smaller market that you don't know, which is kind of defying one of the rules, right? Is kind of understanding your market. But maybe you find a really good team there, a real estate team who owns rental properties in the area, who can really give you like an idea of what that place looks like and what you can rent for. And then maybe hiring a property manager. So no, there's deals all the time. You just have to find them. And the thing is, with someone who's brand new to this, are probably not going to find the deals. It's the people who have been in it for a while who can kind of exhaust different options to find those deals.
We have to ask because there's always nightmare stories in real estate investors. Can you give us an idea of what your worst nightmare story is and how you handled it?
Which one? Okay, well, I'll give you two because they're really fun. One, after FinTalks weekend last year. So FinTalks is this weekend retreat I do with all of the members from my Tuesday finance group, and it's an in-person meetup that we do all weekend long. Literally the last day, it turns out in the winter time, the hose got cracked, but cracked inside the wall. And someone tried to water the garden out back and flooded the entire basement rental. And I had a short-term rental person coming in 3 hours later. So that was a really fun thing to navigate, of like soaping up, like getting all the water. Thankfully it's Colorado, things dry really quickly, but it was just really stressful. I was also 8 months pregnant at this time and trying to like wrap up this weekend because I was leaving in 2 days to go back to Vancouver because I wasn't allowed to have my baby in the US because of visa reasons for my partner, right? So it was just this crazy time. Another thing that's happened is I had 2 kids all out brawl in my short-term rental. Like literally, I don't know exactly what they were on or what was going on, but they had a physical fight. It looked like a movie scene where like the coffee table's flattened, the TV's off the wall, broken, there are shoes, blood everywhere. Like it was absolutely nuts. And so that was like kind of one of those moments where you're like, oh, is this worth it? And I didn't have to clean it up because I was out of the country with a 2-week-old. And I guess a third one is things happen, right? Things you just can't predict. And you get those calls early in the morning, late at night, you wake up to 7 missed calls, and that can just be really stressful. And for me, one of those things that happened was actually my tenant, who was a very good friend of mine, passed away, who lived in my house, and we were going to move back in with her, and a freak accident. And I got a call from her mom that she had passed away. And so just navigating these different scenarios, you're constantly pulled in different directions, emotionally, physically, financially. And that's something for your late starters you have to think about, is that, do you have that capacity? Because maybe you're in your 50s and you've been doing life a certain way. Taking that on is probably not something you want to do unless you're truly ready for it.
I agree. That's why I invest in syndications.
Yes.
All you got to do is vet the investment, sit back and collect the dividends and capital appreciation. We'll talk about syndications in another real estate episode. But one thing that if people start in their 40s, they can do and have the capital, got to have the capital because they're expensive entry point, is you can create a syndication ladder where you roll things. And if I had created in my 40s a 10-year syndication ladder, I'd be financially free now. Mm-hmm. So there are ways you can use those too. to escalate your path to FI, but you got to start earlier and you got to have the income and the capital to do it. Real estate is expensive, but it sounds you were able to get involved without, in many ways, much capital. And I'm very impressed with your journey. I'm jealous because I do see the complete advantages. I'm not sure at 57 I can handle a flooded basement or a complete brawl in my rental, but it is what it is. Maybe some late starters can do that and have that emotional capacity. I just know my limitations. Let's transition into the last phase of our talk today. You are a consummate entrepreneur. Yes, you have a W-2 job, but you probably work harder outside of your job than inside of your job. You created a platform called FinTalks. Where did this come from? What's your vision? And what goes on with it? What do people have to gain from this thing called FinTalks?
Actually throw that last one back to you two. But so FinTalks came about in March of 2020, which if you remember what I said earlier, there was some crazy things happening in my life. I was severely depressed after leaving a partner. I had I didn't know what I was doing. Like if I was making, what was going on? I just felt like I'd blown up my life. I was sitting alone in a pandemic-ridden world in my house with literally, I only had one stripper pole in my kitchen because it was the only thing I had from when I was like 24 years old. I had a bed, a TV, and a couch that I had bought for $100 at a sorority garage sale. And that was and some kitchen stuff because I used to own a company where I used to make food for people and deliver it to their houses. So this is my house. I've got nothing in it. And I'm just sitting there drinking wine, crying. And I decided I've been always wanting to start a podcast or something to help people with educational finances. So I decided, okay, I'm going to put on Facebook that I'm going to do some sort of financial education thing at 5:30 p.m. Mountain Time today. I went for a walk with a friend. Turns out 5:30 Mountain Time was during my walk. So I hid in a bush and started this conversation about high yield savings accounts. Literally, I still have this video and I think it's hilarious. It's me trying to find Wi-Fi because I'm sure I had cheap phones back then, which I wasn't paying enough for or something. And sitting in a bush with wind and being high yield savings account, guys, this is why you need one. So I started doing this every single day. So I created 77 videos in 2020, but after about maybe 2 weeks, so I was probably 10 videos in, maybe a little bit more than that. I had 2 people who've been watching religiously because they're just my favorite. They were so good to me. Was we should meet up and we should talk about this in person. So I decided every Tuesday, instead of doing this call, this talk to my phone and educating people, thankfully not in a bush sometimes, mostly in my house. Every Tuesday I would get on a Zoom call, pick a topic, and we would talk about it. It literally started with 5 people, me included in that 5, one friend who was just being really nice to join, another friend who I'm sure was just being really nice to join, and then 2 other people who actually wanted to join. And that evolved from those 5 people. And every week I would send an email out with the topic, some things to think about when it comes to the topic so we could have some actual questions to run through. And it grew from by word of mouth, because I didn't market it, from 5 people in March of 2020. And we're still doing it today in 2023, 3 years later, every single Tuesday. And it got up to 55 people. I had to change the way I had to do my email list of getting people the invite. So now it's about 35 every single week.
That's awesome. It's actually evolved from a virtual endeavor to a real life endeavor. What happened there?
Yeah. So again, I mentioned earlier, there's someone said this about me, which is I like to build the parachute on the way down. So someone had mentioned in a FinTalks episode that they were like, we should meet in person. This is Alex Wong, who you all know. He's like, we should meet in person. So I was like, great, guys. How about a month and a half from now in July, right after CampFI, because a bunch of you are coming for this. So I decided, and this is my serial entrepreneurship. What I find with people is a lot of people will just get stuck in numbers, they'll get stuck in ideas, but they don't actually do things. And there's also the opposite of people who just do things and then they don't really doesn't pan out because they didn't do the right thing, right? Because they didn't research it. For me, I felt yes, let's do this in-person event. I had 16 people sleeping all around my 3-bedroom house. There's literally 16 of them between the living room to The bedrooms, we had 25 people the first year who came to FinTalks weekend. We had 45 people who came to FinTalks weekend last year. We are now at 30 people for FinTalks weekend for this upcoming year. And yeah, they wanted to do it, so I provided.
The community is an awesome community. It's very generous, as are you. Take us to the present. You're married. Well, you're not married. You have a partner. You have a new child. How has FI changed? How has having a partner, a house, kids change your approach to FI? Do you think you'll get there later with all these new quasi expenses?
Yes, that was the question. Yes, the answer is yes. I will get there later from that, and it's totally worth it. So, as I mentioned, my partner can't work because of a visa situation. So he does like incredible, like he's redoing the house that we live in now that we just bought. I never expected to live in a single family house with a backyard with grass. Like I hate mowing grass. But here I am paying my own mortgage for the first time in my life, other than the rents I paid when I was younger. So I never expected to pay my own mortgage this quickly. I think I probably thought I'd probably house hack at least one more before I did that, which definitely eats into, potential savings down the road. Also, it gives us a really nice place to live. Have family and friends over every weekend. It's really nice to have this space for us. Having a kid, so far, the beginning of having a kid is expensive. And I really think about the idea of phases of life. I'm in an expensive phase of life. I have a new baby, so I paid medical bills to have the baby. We go for convenience more often now, just while having a brand new kid. We had some medical issues, so like making sure that the kid had whatever it needed, enjoy its life, right? I had some physical issues with his mouth, which affected breastfeeding, et cetera. So we got those fixed and we had to pay out of pocket. And we actually just got married last week by Elvis. We went to Vegas and did the Little Chapel of Love and got married, and it was amazing. So actually, I'm literally 1 week married as of today. And so all of this has changed because I was doing this all on my own. All this stuff was just me running around like a crazy person, like my chicken with my head cut off, right? To satisfy all these parts of my life. And now I have a partner who can help, which is really nice because it means I can take on even more. So poor him. And so for me, it's changed it in the way that I probably could have quit my job easily last year, like with the 2 houses and what I was making off of them, no problem. Now, definitely can't do that. I'm kind of stuck to my job or working my W-2 for a little bit longer. And I'm okay with that because they bring so much joy and excitement to my life and help that it's just different. The one thing I'll say about having a kid, and I knew this a little bit, I didn't know, first of all, how much I'd want to spend time with them. Like it's so fun. But secondly, I don't have the capacity I used to have to take on everything I used to take on. So specifically, my financial education, the Amberley Grant Finance on Instagram, has really taken a back burner for me making videos. I used to post every single day with videos of me talking to cameras and doing all this fun stuff. And I literally don't have the energy or time to do that anymore. So that's changed a lot for me.
Amberley, I have heard a rumor, though, that even though your bandwidth has decreased, that you are still thinking about starting a new venture in podcasting. Mm-hmm. So what can you tell us about that?
Yeah, well, and I will say this, having a supportive partner is really, really important. And a partner who you're on the same page financially with is so important. And so to segue from that, because he is like, Amberley, when are you starting this podcast? And even though we're like, I have no time. And he's like really encouraging me. We're like, hey, we need to set this room up and get Doug Cunnington, our friend, over to help me set my podcasting room up. So I want to start a podcast. Specifically, I'm going to talk more about behavioral like science and finances. So making sure to understand, why are people not actually saving? How can you start getting into that mindset, go from scarcity to abundance? How do you go from saving to spending? And just making all those changes in your life that are really difficult. And maybe you don't know exactly why you're not doing it. And maybe I can give you a bit of insight in regards to it. The other thing we're doing, just if anyone wants to join us, is we are doing a FinTalks cruise in January or February. So that's going to be really fun as well.
Your life is full. I don't know how you do it. And for you to say that there's less capacity makes me tired. I'm 57. I used to have this kind of energy. I commend you for all that you can do and all that you do for the community. We're about late starting. Less on the late, more on the starting. as has been said before. You were a late starter just at a younger age, and you can be a late starter at any age. These things that we've talked about today apply to everybody. Real estate can be an important part of the plan, as we've heard today. Let's conclude with some specific tips, tricks, and hacks you have for mindset, money, or life for late starters of any age.
Saying yes to opportunities, whatever those might be, is really important. I find a lot of people don't like to say yes because they're afraid or whatever it is. Feel the fear, walk through it, and do it. And so that's one of my first things. Secondly, get help. If it's help through a financial coach, make sure you vet them properly, through a therapist, because you've got some things that you need to work on, asking for help from friends or family, or from our community. As you mentioned, Bill, FinTalks community, the finance community in general, specifically the FIRE community, is extremely generous with their time and their attention. And we're always happy to help you out. And making sure that you give back if you do take, you always have to give back as well. I think that's just the two things that I would tell people.
Great. I love it. The mindset part of it is so important. And I love your point about just walking through the fear. I mean, life is going to be full of uncertainty and things we've never done before. And sometimes they're scary, but it's just because we've never done them before. I mean, I tried surfing for the first time last year, and it was kind of weird and I wasn't good at it, but hey, I can say I've done it now.
Yep. I think life, like a good life, is a life that you keep walking forward and moving forward. And if you're feeling yourself stagnant, just start saying yes to opportunities.
Feeling stagnant, start a podcast is my recommendation.
Yeah.
You'll have more than enough to do. At any rate, Amberly, it's been awesome having you here today. I think you provided real value in the mindset, money, and life categories that we try and emphasize. And then you've given a lot of motivation and tips on the real estate side of things. We'll certainly dive into these things more, but this is a great overview of the vocabulary and the possibility of real estate, which certainly is an option for our audience to escalate their path to FI should they have the risk tolerance and the capability of doing so. It's like starting a business. It's like having three legs to the stool of paper assets, real estate assets, and a small business. And real estate is 2 in 1. You can kill 2 birds with 1 stone. Thank you again for being with us today. Look forward to seeing you again in person soon.
See you guys soon.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of Catching Up to FI. We would appreciate it if you could leave a 5-star review so that our message can reach others.
We are not lawyers, financial advisors, accountants, or tax experts. Please consult your own professional advisors before making any important decisions. Our content is for entertainment and education purposes only.
We'll see you next time on Catching Up to FI.